Okay, today's daf, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, good in Isru Chag. Today's daf is daf Mem Ches and Yevmot. We went for a 4 Shlema, 4 Yosef Azriel ben Chaim Michal and Elazar ben Reuma. Now we said we'll start from the top of the page, Amar Rabba, but just real quickly see the last few lines in case you missed those last few lines and then Zion and base, because that's really what we're talking about over here. Let's understand something. An Eved, not an Eved Ivri. An Eved Ivri is a full Jew who's just working for you for whatever the reason is. He was poor, or he sold himself, or he did an Aveira, and he stole and he couldn't repay. That's an Eved Ivri. We're not talking about Eved Ivri. We talk about Eved Stam, that means an Eved Knani. Eved Knani is a non-Jewish slave who you acquired, and normally when you acquire him, you give him circumcision, you mal him, you make him circumcised, and you put him in the mikveh so that he's tovel l'shem eved, which means he's like what we call a half a Jew. That's a nice term for it. He has the mitzvahs of a woman, right? He's not chayv mitzvah says he's chayv losa says he's like a half Jew. That's an eved knani.
Is that a third category? It's just a stam eved without being an eved?
Okay, no, there's no start. There could be an eved knani. It's either okay. No, so an Eved Ivri is not really an Eved at all. He's just working for you. Okay, yeah. An Eved Knani is a guy who's working for you. However, we'll see that an Eved Knani normally he's circumcised against his will even, and you put him in the mikveh, and then he's chayiv mitzvahs. However, we'll talk about exceptions. Let's say he doesn't want to be circumcised, and you don't circumcise him, etc. Still call it Eved Knani, but he can go back from that. Once he's circumcised and he went to the mikveh and he's like what we call a half a Jew, he has a mitzvah of like a woman, then there's no turning back. He's always a half a Jew. He's always a half a Jew, and then he can only, and then we'll see as a machlokas here, what happens afterwards when he's freed. If you free him and liberate him, what happens then? Then he becomes a full Jew. Then he becomes Jew. But is it automatic? Does he have to accept the mitzvahs or not? So here's what we talked about. In yesterday's Gemara number days, it said, near the top of the page, it said, talk about what a person wants to be Megayer. It says over there, Echad Ger, a Ger, that means a convert. Echad Eved Meshuchar, the same thing with an Eved Meshuchar, freed slave. And it talks about this, you have to let him know the mitzvahs, you let him know some of the mitzvahs, kalos, some mitzvahs, of course, we'll teach him the mitzvahs. Sounds like an Eved Meshuchar, a slave who you're freeing now to become a full Jew, must also learn the mitzvahs, to accept the mitzvahs. So the Gemara now says near the bottom of the page, 6 lines from the bottom of the page, doesn't make a salk that we assume now the kabbalah of all mitzvahs, that an Eved Meshuchar also has to accept the mitzvahs. Now remember, he when he was first acquired as a slave and forcibly circumcised and put into the mikveh, I mean, he could, if he fought it and the guy didn't want to push it, we'll talk about that later on. But he became an Eved Knani. Now, when he's freed subsequently, does he also have to accept all the mitzvahs now? So, kasach a couple of all mitzvahs for a minute. More and beger, a ger has to accept the mitzvahs. But Eved Meshuchar, he doesn't have to accept mitzvahs because he's already a half a Jew. He's already accepted the mitzvahs. All right, he's forcibly or not, but he's accepted the mitzvahs. Rav Sheshes Lakash, it's a machlokas. Rav Shimon Elazar Rabban, it's a machlokas. The Tanya, what's that? A yafas tower. A man in wartime, you met a shiksa who he fell in love with. And what's the rule? So it says first, the person is allowed to cry for her parents for 30 days, well, and then you could bring her in. In other words, you could forcibly take her in. That's if she didn't accept the mitzvahs. Let's say right away she says, "Oh yeah, I love you too, and I'll accept the mitzvahs." You could put her into the mikveh right away. Even a woman you have to have a mikveh to go to. You have to go into the mikveh to become a Jew. You can marry right away. That's the Tanakama. And that means if she accepted the mitzvahs, then you could do it right away. Shimon Elazar says, no. Even if she doesn't accept the mitzvahs, kofa bil l'shem shifras, you could force her into the mikveh to be a shifra knanis. V'chozim bil l'shem shifra, and then you could force her. You could force her to mikveh a second time l'shem shifra in order to liberate her. And he frees her. She's liberated, and now she's a full Jewess. In other words, if he doesn't want to wait the 30 days. Even if she's not makabel, if he could force him to make him Rashi, the last line of the page says, the whole tefillah of Adam al-Karchani. And the Farshim Slave Shot and Rashi is, according to everybody, you're tovel a goy to be an Eved Knani for you, you could force him. You could force him to the mikveh. That's all. And you force her then, and then you force her, you liberate her also against her will, and she becomes a full Jewess. So what do we see over here? That Rav Shimon Elazar says that you can force an Evet to be a slave, to be a Kanani for you, forcing him into the mikvah, etc. We'll talk about the Mila if he doesn't want to be Mal. Sometimes you don't force him, but you could force him. You could, and then you force him against will. In other words, since you force a goy to be an Eviknani against his will or her will in this case, against his or her will, and then she has to do the mitzvahs. Then when you topple them, that's also against their will because it doesn't make any difference. They're already being the kind of mitzvahs. That's Rav Shimon Elazar's opinion. The Tanakama says no. The Tanakama says that if she didn't accept the mitzvahs, you're not megayer her. You could do it right away. Otherwise, you have to wait. So that's the machlokes of Shimon Elazar and Chum. Meaning, again, when it comes to acquiring an Eved Kanani, or in this case, a Shifra Kananis, the same thing applies, that you can force them, and you force them into becoming a half Jew against their will. Put them into the mikveh and give them a mila. We'll talk about if he doesn't want to be mal, then you don't want to force him. What happens then? But according to Shmuel, everybody agrees you could force him for that. The question is then when he's Megayer, does he have to accept the mitzvah or not? So we could say, so in our Gemara at the top of the page, you read on the base, when it said, you also have to let them know my mitzvahs. It sounds like according to Rabbanan, you have to let them know what the mitzvahs are. They have to accept them, even once he's an Eved Kanani. Now, at this point, the Gemara is saying, according to Shimon Elazar, it makes no difference. Force him to become an Eved Kanani, force him to become a full Jew. Either way, it's against their will. You force them to make for once, you force them to make a second time. They don't have to accept anything. According to Rabbanan, no, they do have to accept when they're becoming a full Jew. Even though they were forced to become an Eved Kanani, to become a full Jew, they have to accept the mitzvahs. That's what it sounds like at this point. However, we're going to come back. Let's wait and see the Gemara if we have any questions at the end. Amar Rabba. My time Rav Shimon Elazar. What's Rav Shimon Elazar's reason? Like force him to call Eved Ish Mikdas Kesef. An Eved Ish, every servant of a man, Mikdas Kesef acquired by money. What does that mean? Eved Ish. Eved Ish for Eved Isha. Does it make a difference if the Eved is owned by a male Jew or a female Jew? Doesn't mean that. Eved Ish Atvamal Bakarcho. An Eved who's a man, you can force him against his will. You can force him against his will to get circumcised. Be a Tamal Ben Ish Balkarcho. But a Ben Ish, a Rashi explains this according to his second preferred explanation, that if a ger is Megayer, he can force his young children to be Megayer with him, but he can't force his adult children. If they're adults, he can't force Be a Tamal Ben Ish Balkarcho. You can't force somebody to become a Jew, but you could force an Eved. You could force him to become a Jew to be circumcised. That's how in other words, you could force him to become circumcised, period. So and you can also now you convert him also, but you can't be, and once you free him, he's a full Jew. So when it comes to being circumcised, as for an Eved Kanani, you could force him against his will, but you can't force a regular Jew against his will. That he has to accept. The Rabbanan will say, just like you can't force a non-Jew to become a Jew, a normal person, the son of a man, and you can't force a Ben who is a person. You can't force a person, a Ben who is an adult, be a Baal Kochach. Even if a ger is being Megayer, you can't force his adult children to be Megayer. You can't force an Eved Ish also against his will. Elo Haksiv called Eved Ish. What does he do with that Eved Ish? That's for Shmuel's Rosh. That's for a different Rasha. What is the Eved Ish? To tell you that the Eved who is an Ish, only if he's an Eved of an Ish, not if he's an Eved not of an Ish. Meaning, it doesn't mean if you abandon your slave, you're mafker, abandon him. He's also free. He doesn't even need to get shukr. Shneimar. Kol Eved Ish miknas kesef. Eved Ish v'lo Eved Ish. Again, the same question. What does it mean Eved Ish? The Eved only of a male, not of a female Jew. Ela Eved sheyesh lo b'shus Rabo olav. An Eved who has control of his slave. Kori Eved b'shein b'shus Rabo and Kori Eved, which means to say if he abandons him, then he's no longer a slave. He doesn't even need to get shikhr. And apparently, then he wouldn't be a full Jew. And it sounds like he can go back and as long as he's an Eved, then he has the mitzvahs. But if he abandons him, he's no longer an Eved. It sounds like it's not familiar that he wouldn't even go back. He wouldn't have mitzvahs anymore. He's a half Jew, but he's no longer a half Jew. He's nobody. That's when he's Eved. As long as he's an Eved of a person. If he's not an Eved person, guy abandoned, he's not an Eved at all. Maskara Papa, wait a minute. You're saying now, at this point, it sounds in the Gemara that you can force, according to Rav Shimon Elazar, according to him, you can force a goy to be your eved. You can force him, mal him against his will, and put him into the mikveh against his will. According to Rabbanan, not so much, because Rabbanan, he said at the beginning of this year that the Choltfield Savadam al Koch, it's mashma. According to everybody here, it's mashma. According to the Rabbanan, it wouldn't be that case. The Rabbanan say no. That just like you can't mal a regular non-Jew against his will, you can't force him to become a Jew. You can't also be mal an eved ish against his will. Can't do so. Maskul or papa. Where do you see that? Maybe by a fastower, what's a fastower? You found this shiksa in the middle of the war, right? You invaded their land, or there was a war, and you got her. So she wasn't doing the mitzvahs, so she wasn't involved in the mitzvahs. So there, maybe you need the Rabbanan say you have to need her consent. If he's doing mitzvahs already, meaning an Eved Knani who's already doing the mitzvahs, maybe the Rabbanan are also moda that you can free him against his will. In other words, just like you force the goy to, just like when you acquired an Eved, you acquire an Eved from, let's say, a goy, and you convert him. If you acquired an Eved from another Jew, he's already an Eved Knani. But if you acquire him from a goy, you can force him into the mikveh and force him to give him a meal to become an Eved Knani and do the mitzvahs. So he says over here, the shaykh mitzvahs, maybe the Rabbanan also motive that he doesn't have to accept the mitzvahs again to become a full Jew. What do we say? According to Rav Shapiro, you can force a goy to be your Eved, and now he's an Eved Knani. You mal him l'shem avdus, and you put him in the l'shem avdus. He's now an Eved Knani. He has mitzvahs like a woman. Then you can free him also against his will to make him a full Jew against his will. The Rabbanan is saying no. Rabbanan not that way. Rabbanan is saying you can't force, just like you can't force a goy to become a Jew. You don't convert. You don't go to a goy and say we're forcing you to become. That's what the goyim did, right? The Christians and the Muslims converted people against their will, right? But the Jews don't do that. So just like you don't do that for an Eved also. You don't force him to become a Jew. But that's what we said till now. The Gemara says, who says maybe the Rabbanan are also motive to that. Maybe a shiksa, a yafas toar, she wasn't doing mitzvahs, but an eved who shaykh mitzvahs already, that you can force him. You could, by liberating him, you force him to become a full Jew. Tanya, whether it's a ger, meaning a convert, or if you buy from a goy, he has to accept the mitzvahs. But if you buy from Yisrael, ain't tzarich l'kabel money. Who does it call? If Shimon Elazar, he doesn't. He can force him. Rabbanan. If you buy from a goy, he has to accept the mitzvahs now for the first time. He doesn't have to kabel. In other words, you make him into a full Jew almost immediately. Right? So what do we say? In order. If you buy from a goy, then he has to be makabel the mitzvahs to be a full Jew. But if you buy from Yisrael, the way Rashi learns that to convert him to be a half Jew, to be an Eved Knani, everybody says you can force him. The question is now, does he have to accept the mitzvahs now afterwards to be a full Jew? He doesn't have to. If he buys from the goy, he has to makabel the mitzvahs. He doesn't have to makabel mitzvahs at all. In other words, you can force him once he's already an Eved Knani and you buy him from a Jew. Then you don't have to force him now to convert him. You don't have to. When you convert him to be a full Jew, he doesn't have to accept the mitzvahs anymore. So that means goes like the Rabbanan. See, when you according to what's the difference between Shimon Elazar and the Rabbanan? Shimon Elazar says, you can force him initially and you can force him later. Doesn't make any difference. You can force him. The Rabbanan say, oh no, if you buy from a goy who never accepted, then yes, then even if you hold like Rashi that you could force him to be an Eved Knani, but to be an Eved Ivrit, to be a full Jew, he has to accept the mitzvahs, right? He has to accept the mitzvahs. Right? Doesn't have to. Meaning, if he's already a half Jew and you liberate him, he doesn't have to accept the mitzvahs anymore. So Elamai, so the Gemara says, Elav Rabbanim Mishman Lokech Merav Kechavim Tzarich L'Kabel, Aval Lokech Yisrael Ein Tzarich L'Kabel Elakasha Echad Der Bechad B'Shech. So what does the Gemara mean on Amid Beis yesterday's daf? On 10 lines from the top of the page where we started with today, where we mentioned that Gemara Echad Der Bechad B'Shech, that you have to let him know the mitzvahs. What is that speaking about? Itanyi Linyan Tefillah. That's the Linyan Tefillah. For Tefillah, you have to let him know and understand. In other words, this we say that doesn't mean that you have to learn other mitzvahs. You have to learn mitzvahs really going on the ger, on the regular convert. When it says echad ger v'echad mishucher is going on the tefillah that you have to be told them, that applies to both a ger and to an eved mishucher. Meaning that an eved who's already an eved Kanani, how did he become an eved Kanani? When you circumcised him for that and you put him into the mikveh for that initially. Now you might have done that, or another Jew may have done that. But if you buy that eved Kanani from another Jew, and now you want to free him and make him a full Jew, yes, he has to go to the mikveh, but he doesn't have to accept mitzvahs anymore because he already accepted them when he became an eved Kanani. No, he was forced to accept them when he became. According to Shmuel, according to everybody, he was forced to accept him when he became an eved Kanani. Once he became an eved Kanani, you have to force him to become to accept the mitzvahs as a full Jew. According to this, we're saying now no. According to everybody, you don't have to. When you buy from a goy, and now you want to convert him, so then maybe he has to accept the mitzvahs. But if he was already an eved Kanani, either you made him an eved Kanani or another Jew made him an eved Kanani, he can't be an eved Kanani when he's in the hands of a goy. An eved Kanani, by definition, means that he's a Jew. He's owned by a Jew. A goy cannot own. We had that the other day. A goy cannot own another person, but a Jew can own another person. So if a Jew owned another person, by making him an eved Kanani and converting him even against his will for that purposes, once he's doing that, he has to keep the mitzvahs. And then once you convert him fully by freeing him and then putting him in the mikveh again, he doesn't have to accept the mitzvahs. It's automatic. I give him time Rabbanim. Back to this issue of Yifas Torah, we mentioned at the beginning of Kiseitze. He talks there about if Yifas Torah, where you get this girl, you find this beautiful girl in the war, and of course it's not a good idea to take her because what happens afterwards? It becomes an Saramara, exactly right. So what he says, you shave her head and you do her nails. Now that's very common today. They do their nails. What does that mean? Do their nails? Cut off her nails. Shave her head, cut off her nails. Kiva Omer Tagdo, let her nails grow long. Omer Blazer is like this. Nemarasiya Barosh. It says you do an act. It says for Asasa, it says Vigilches Rosha, that's one act, shave. And then the Asa and do her nails. What does it mean to do her nails? Today, to do her nails means to make them all kinds of fancy colors, right? But what does do her nails mean there? So Rabbi Lazar says, you cut the nails off. Lazar says, no, you let them grow so long that they're disgusting. Rabbi Lazar, never sees where it says an act by the hair, which is shaving, but never see, but sometimes it says an act when it comes to nails. Just like by the hair, it says specifically shave, so the act there is shaving. Removal, we call removal. Afkan avar here also means removing the nails. Okay, so it means cutting the nails. Rabbi Kiva Omer, no. It says an act by the head, which is shaving, but and it says an act when it comes to the nails. Malahon and nivel, just like by the hair, when you shave their head, that's considered a disfigurement for a woman. No woman wants to have her head shaved. That's not normal. Afkan nivel, so here also means something disfigured. Cutting nails is normal. Letting the nails grow disgustingly long, that would be a disfigurement. So he says, let the nails grow. For Ayel de Rav Lazar, but we have a pasuk that indicates like Rav Lazar means cutting the nails, right? It means removing the nails, because it says in Mephibosheth ben Shaul, Yored Likrasimach came to me, he lost a raklav, he didn't cut his toenails, he lost his svama, and he didn't do his mustache. So just like there it meant cutting his toenails, it means shaving or cutting his mustache. Ma'asiyah avar, so you see over there it means remove. Okay, that's what it means. Removing, shave her head and remove her nails, even if they're long enough that they make her beautiful, you cut them off. In other words, try to make her disgusting so to discourage you from taking her as a wife.
This is only 30 days.
So here we're going to talk about how long is it?
It was for only 30 days.
Well, no, we'll see. She should cry for her mother. You take her to the house, you let her cry. You don't take her as a wife yet. She cries for her mother and father 30 days. Blazer Omer, Avia Mamish. Ima Mamish means cry for her parents. That's literal. Take it the pasuk, you take it literally. But Kiva Omer, no, Avia Zuavas Chavam. You let her cry the 30 days to get the Vos Chavam out of her head, right? To forget about the Chen Omer says Omer Eitz Avi Ata. It says, well, Avanim, it goes on, right? To tell the wood, you are my father. Those people who pray to Eitzim and Avanim. So Avi over here, Avi of Ima means Avaros Chavam. How long? Yerach Yamim, Yerach Shloshim Yom. Yerach is 30 days. Shemar Lazar, no, it's 9 Tishim Yom. It's 90 days. Why? Yerach is Shloshim Yomim, like full days. The full month is another Shloshim. The achar came tavo eleu baltav. I saw l'chayisha another 30 days. It's still 90. Maskal Ravina. If you're darshaning ba'achar kach as being a repetition of the first 30, maybe it means 60. Maskal Ravina ema yerach shloshim yamim shloshim. That's 30 plus 30. Ba'achar came kihani another 60, like the first 30 and 30. So kasha, that's a kasha. Maybe it should mean 120. But the question is it 30 days or is it 90 days? Tanrabanan. Are you allowed to keep a slave an Eved Kanani even though he's not Mal? We said you become an Eved Kanani. The normal thing to do is you circumcise him against his will and put him to mikvah against his will. Can you keep a slave even though he's not circumcised? Rabbi Shmuel says yes, you may. Rabbi Shmuel. Maybe that's what you referred to, Avram, when you said there's a different kind. Maybe that's what you meant. Not really a full Eved Kanani. You can keep an Eved. He's not really called an Eved Kanani. Kanani means a guy, but he's not really called what we call an Eved Kanani. If he's not circumcised, can you have an Eved? If not, the Rishon Shah says you can. Rabbi says no, unless you circumcise him for the purpose of the Eved Kanani, you're not supposed to keep him. That's what Rabbi Kiva says. Amar Bishmol, the pasuk says when it comes to Shabbos, being nafesh ben amascha v'hager, right? They should also be refreshed. You shouldn't work your slaves or the ger in your midst. We'll talk about what ger means over there. It's supposed to rest on Shabbos, and that's and that guy is speaking about a guy who has not been circumcised. It says v'yimashcha ben amascha. Not how do we know it's not circumcised? We're going to bring that proof in a minute. But Rabbi Shmuel said, Rekiva, you say you're not allowed to keep an Eved who's not circumcised. Here the pasuk says v'yinafash ben amascha. On Shabbos also you're supposed to let the son of your maidservant rest. And they were talking about one who's not circumcised. So Rabbi Kiva answered him, that's speaking about where you bought the Eved right before Shabbos. Right? The second before Shabbos, a minute before Shabbos. Plus, when you didn't get a chance to mal him. In other words, but by next Shabbos, you better have him circumcised. Rabbi Kiva says you're not allowed to keep a servant unless he's been circumcised. It's mashma that you have to let your uncircumcised slave rest on Shabbos too. It's mashma. You have a slave. No, that's speaking about you got him right before Shabbos. You didn't have a chance. But normally you're not allowed to keep an Eved after Shabbos. You have to mal him right away. Let's speak malo. That's what it's speaking there. The Kohamas, everybody agrees to be nafish ben amascha be'Eved. We're speaking on an Eved who's not circumcised. How do you know that my mashma? How do you see that? It says be nafish ben amascha. Shmuel said, "Oh, you see an uncircumcised slave you can keep." He says, "No, that's speaking about you bought him right before Shabbos." How do you know the pasuk speaking about an uncircumcised slave? My mashma. The time ben nafish ben amascha. That's what the pasuk speaking about an uncircumcised slave. Maybe it's speaking about a circumcised slave. It just says ben amascha. How do you know it means uncircumcised? Maybe it means a circumcised slave. And that's the Shiur when a pasuk says another pasuk when it talks about Shabbos says what? That this is an aseret sedibros. They must rest. That Eved, Harei Eved Mol. They were speaking about the Eved is circumcised. Harei Eved Mol. They were speaking about a circumcised slave. Hamani Mekayim v'nafesh ben amascha. So why is the pasuk in Shmos when it says v'nafesh ben amascha v'ager? What ben amascha is that speaking about? The Eved Oral, speaking about an Eved Oral. So everybody agrees that the pasuk v'nafesh ben amascha speak out an Eved Oral. If you have an uncircumcised slave, you have to let him rest on Shabbos, and if you have a circumcised slave, you have to let him on Shabbos. Two different sukkim. That's why there's two different sukkim. One speaking oral, one speaking oral. What about the hager? What ger are we speaking about there? What do you mean a ger? Isn't a ger a full Jew? You don't have to be warned not to work him. He's a regular Jew. He has a mitzvah of Shabbos. What do you have to? You have to let the ger rest on Shabbos. What kind of a ger is speaking? Zeh ger toshav. A ger toshav is a guy who's accepted sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, including avodas kachavim. Right. So he says the ger zeh ger toshav. You have to let him rest too. In other words, if he's in your employ, you have to let him rest on Shabbos too. Tosas asks, what do you mean? Goyim don't keep Shabbos, right? Shev mitzvahs b'nei Noach. In fact, goy Shabbos chayiv misa. He's not allowed to keep Shabbos. So what do you mean over here? So we're speaking when he's in your employ. Now, a regular guy keeps 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. He doesn't keep Shabbos. He's not supposed to keep Shabbos. But if he's in your employ, he shouldn't be working for you on Shabbos. That's what I mean. Just like your Eved Knani, circumcised or not, shouldn't be working for you. A ger toshav, who's also he's a hired hand, should not be working for you. But ger toshav, how do we know? Atom is like a toshav aino ela ger tzedek. Maybe it's a regular ger tzedek, a full convert. We have another passage about gercha. Again, Because why? Why do you feel non-rest on Shabbos? Because Shabbos is the equivalent of Os Kachavim, Rashi says. Machal Shabbos is like Avodas Kachavim. If you're Machal Shabbos b'Far Hasi, it's like you worship Avodah Zarah. So it's similar to that. So just like he's warned, he's not supposed to do Avodas Kachavim, Shem Mitzvah Noach, he's not supposed to work, at least for you on Shabbos. Doesn't mean he's supposed to keep Shabbos, but shouldn't be working for you on Shabbos. Okay, so far we had a machlokes here from Shmuel and Rekiva. We said you could, when you buy a Kanani, if you're buying from a Jew who's already circumcised, buying from a goy, you can circumcise him and mal him against his will, according to what Rashi learns. What about if he's not circumcised? You didn't want to circumcise him. He didn't want to. He refused. You didn't want to force him. It's hard to force a person to be circumcised if he's an adult and he's not
without anesthesia.
Without anesthesia, he's anesthetized, right? He's not anesthetized. It's pretty hard to force him. So, but if you could, but let's say you can't. Or you didn't want to, whatever the reason was, you didn't do it. Rav Akiva says you're not allowed to keep him unless he's circumcised. Shmuel says you may. Now we'll see a new thing. He didn't want to be circumcised. You didn't want to force him. He didn't want to be circumcised. You can bear with him for 12 months. Yeah, keep him for 12 months and then see. Lomo, if he didn't want to circumcise after 12 months, you got to resell him back to a guy. Try to sell him in a different market. Otherwise, because if you sell him back to the same guy, you'll probably lose a lot of money because he knows now. The guy may know that the reason you're selling him back is because you're not allowed to keep him, so the market value has gone down. But in any case, you're not allowed to keep him. But you could keep him for 12 months. Amru going to come in Rav Papa. So the rabbi said, Rav Papa, come on, look, this is not Rav Akiva. You just said if he doesn't want to be circumcised, you keep him for 12 months. After 12 months, you better sell him back. We don't want the uncircumcised people in your midst. Right, that's part of what we'll talk later on why that is the case. But you shouldn't have uncircumcised people in your household. So for 12 months, fine. Afterwards, not. But if you keep for 12 months, Rav Akiva said you can't keep them at all. The Char goes against Rav Akiva. Rav Akiva, Amrei Mekayim. Rav Papa said no. I feel to him Rav Akiva. That's where he didn't agree. He wasn't set. In other words, that's where he didn't agree to be mal. So Rav Akiva says you have to you can't keep them at all. Maybe just for one Shabbos, if you hired him right before Shabbos, but you got him right before Shabbos, but he agreed, and he didn't agree. The Pascha and Milsa Pascha. Rashi learns in the first shot that Pascha means he agreed. He agreed to be circumcised. They agreed in theory. And then when he saw the guy with the knife, he looked at it, he says, you know what? Let me think about it. Then when he agreed, if he didn't agree, he doesn't want to be mal. Rav Akiva says you can't keep. He agreed. He consented. He gave definitely gave his consent, and now he changed his mind. Rashi brings another pshat. If he told him, "I'm going to keep you for 12 months," then I'm going to sell you back. That's what it means. In other words, that means Rav Akiva's either way. Rav Akiva's moda that if either the guy agreed or the Pascal Milsa could also mean that the master consented. I said, okay, listen, I'll give you 12 months. After 12 months, I'm selling you back. It's better to live among the Jews. We treat you better than the Goyim. So,
you have off on Shabbos.
You have off on Shabbos. So, the Pascal Milsa means where there was an agreement, either agreement for 12 months or the guy originally agreed to be mal and then changed his mind, then Rabbi Akiva would agree to. Amrav Kana. I told this in front of Rav Zvid from Nado. Amali, Yachi, again, Lishneha. So why did Rabbi Akiva give the answer before when they said, how according to how you had possibly he has to rest on Shabbos? How do you have a guy who's not? We said that pasuk speaking about a guy who's not circumcised. How could he be in your service if he's not circumcised according to Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva says, it's speaking about where he bought him right before Shabbos, Banish Masa. You didn't get a chance yet to be out. What did you just say? Where he had consented originally, and then he changed his mind. Give that answer. So why did he give this answer and say, speaking about where the guy had consented to originally, or according to the second Shah Rashi, the master and him agreed that we would give him 12 months, and that was it. When they agreed, it's okay. Says Rabbi Akiva gave one of two answers. In other words, Rabbi Akiva says you're not allowed to keep a guy as in your service if he's not circumcised. So he said, what is the pasuk speaking about? You have to let him rest on Shabbos. How could he be in your service? Or how would he be in your service on Shabbos if you can't keep a guy who's uncircumcised? So one answer was, okay, you bought him right before Shabbos. Another answer could be that he agreed to be circumcised and he's delaying it, or you're giving him 12 months, but he agreed in theory. So that's one, you gave one of two answers. Shalach Rabban, the first of the white lines now. Shalach Rabban Shmeid Rabbaloi. Rabban sent the name of Rabbaloi. B'chol Rabbosa, and he said, all my Rebbes also, Omer Li Bishma also said the name of Rabbaloi. What is an example of an uncircumcised Evet you're allowed to keep in your service? If he bought him al manas, not to circumcise him, that was the condition. Again, this mashma like Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says you can't keep a slave if he's uncircumcised. That's only if you didn't make a condition that way. But if you bought him under those circumstances, it's okay. So this is maybe what Avram meant before. So we have an Evet Kanani, regular Kanani that you mal and you circumcise. Or an Evet, you can be given a dispensation for 12 months if he agreed and then he just put it off. Now we have another answer and we say, you know what? If the original agreement was that he wasn't going to be mal, that means he would never become really an Evet Kanani. He's just an Evet just a guy working for you. If he agreed, even Rabbi Kiva's motive. Rav Kana, so again, so why didn't he give the answer? Rav Kana, again, when we asked before Rabbi Kiva, how could the pasuk be nafesh ben amaschov ager? Speaking about a non-circumcised guy that you have to let him rest on Shabbos, how can he be in your employ if he's uncircumcised? You didn't get a chance to mal before Shabbos. Give this answer too. Now we have a third answer. Why didn't you give the other answer before about when they consented and then he changed his mind? He gave one of two reasons. In other words, Rabbi Kiva says you're not supposed to keep an Evet in your employ unless he's circumcised. We find that pasuk says you have to let a guy who's uncircumcised in your employ rest on Shabbos. How can he be uncircumcised? One answer is you bought him right before Shabbos and you didn't get a chance to mal him yet. Another answer is he agreed to be circumcised, but he's pushing it off, or you gave him 12 months. Another answer is you bought him under the condition not to mal him. In other words, that was the condition. The guy sold it to you under that condition, and you bought this guy from another guy also in that condition, not going to mal him, meaning he's never going to become an Avikanani. He's just working for you.
So he doesn't.
Right.
He doesn't pick up the mitzvahs.
He doesn't have mitzvahs, no, because he wasn't. He only gets the mitzvahs like a woman only if you converted him, meaning you circumcised him and you did tefillah both. And as we said before, according to Rashi's mashma, everybody holds that you could force him unless obviously you agreed not to up front, as we said over here.
Isn't that like when we had in the previous over Yom?
Yeah.
You bought the Evet. There's two types of buying. One is buying the goof, and one is buying the shibudim shul of the person.
Right. So here we're talking about buying the goof. A guy cannot own a goof of somebody else, but a Jew can. Yeah, you can own a guy. You can't own a Jew.
But if you buy the Evet only for shibud, then you wouldn't have to mortar.
If you buy him only to work for you, yes, you wouldn't have to according to this. Yes. Yes, Rav Chanina bar Papi, Rav Ami, Rav Yitzchak. Now, for these three rabbis said, I killed Rav Yitzchak at the ante-room, at the front room, under the marquee of Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. The three rabbis were sitting together. Rav Yitzchak Nafcha was the host, obviously. The others come, they said like this: there was a sitting of Lamol. They didn't. None of the goyim, the Jews had taken over that city, and they owned these goyim. And but they never wanted to be circumcised. They worked with them they let them say that they bore with them and said, okay, we'll give you 12 months. Think about it. See what it's like living with the Jews. Maybe you'll agree to be circumcised. No, they never agreed. After 12 months, they didn't agree to be circumcised, and they were resold back to the goyim. Said, if you buy an Evet from a guy and he doesn't want to be circumcised, you let him work with you for 12 months. Lomo, he doesn't want to. That's what we said. That's what the Tanakhama said. That's what the people in that city followed the rule of that Tanakhama. Shimon Elazar says, "Ein mashnos of Eretz Yisrael." You don't leave them in Eretz Yisrael at all if they don't want to be mal. They have sitaris. In other words, if Shimon Elazar's mashma, you don't keep them talk. If you have a group of people and they, or whether it's one or more, here it's talking about a plural. There's a lot of these avodim. And they don't want to be, they don't want to convert at all. They don't want to be circumcised. They don't want to become an Evet Kanani. You don't leave them in Eretz Yisrael because of Hefsataris. In Eretz Yisrael, they keep Taharos in the impurity. We don't have it today, but the point is they're Matame Truma. right? And now a goy is not tamei min Torah, but avikachavim gazru love shiei tamei kazav l'chol dvarim. The rabbi said, in order to keep away from goyim, in order that you shouldn't mix and intermarry, etc. The rabbi said that a goyim are tamei like a zav, even though min Torah they're not tamei, right? There's no a goy is not a shiksa is not a nida, and a goy is not a zav. But the rabbi said that they should. So that min rabbanan they're tamei truma. Of course, if truma is tamei min rabbanan, you don't burn it nor do you eat it, right? Because can't eat it because it's a coin, can't eat it because it's tamei, and you can't burn it because it's not tamei min Torah. But in any case, they're mafsed the taro, so therefore you don't keep them in Eretz Yisrael at all. It's mashma that right, because in Chutz La'aretz, you don't have the regular rules of Trumas and Maasros. So, but in Eretz Yisrael where you do, so he says Rav Shimon says you shouldn't keep around at all. Maybe this is the same Rav Shimon Elazar who said before you force him into everything, right? Force him to become an Aviknani and force him to become a full Jew. And we said the rabbis in Mashma also that way. At the end of the day, they don't. Their argument, how do they argue? They argue when you that I'm not sure you force them also, but if you buy him from, we say if you buy, where's the machlokas there? We said that by Rav Shimon Elazar, the Gemara said Amal from Lokech Manav Nami ain't Sarach Lekabel, right? El Rabbanim V'Shmaim Lokech Manav Sarach Lekabel, Av Lokech Yisrael ain't Sarach Lekabel. So it's mashma that even the Rabbanan say that if you buy from if you buy him from a Jew, he also has something to Kabbalah mitzvahs there. So the machlokas was a very slight machlokas, right? We said Echad Ger Rav Shachar. We came out at the end of Zolin Gabi Tefillah, but they don't really argue when it comes to forcing the goy initially to become Tamal, and then once he's a half a Jew, he's an Aviknani, you free him, and also he becomes free that way. He doesn't have to accept once he's already doing the mitzvahs like a woman. He doesn't have to accept the mitzvahs again. All right. So Shimon Elazar says, some they have said towers. Let's say a city near the border, as far as like the near the frontier, near the border, you don't keep him at all, right? Shemi Yishma because maybe he'll be a spy and we'll go tell the goyim some security issues about the Jews, and that's a bigger concern that the goyim could conquer Eretz Yisrael. So he says over here, Shmuel says you don't leave him for 12 months because they have satar. It's mashma, you keep him a little bit, but if it's near the border, you don't keep him at all. He'll go tell. In other words, maybe he'll hear something, and he hasn't been converted yet, so he's not doing mitzvahs. He doesn't have any kinship to the Jews, so he feels like a full guy, a full avikachavim. And if you keep him in your employ at all, he might hear some security, might hear some secrets, and go tell his goyim, his brothers across the border. Why are the Gerim are converts? Why are they oppressed and afflicted? And the Mepharshim says Jews, we know why, because we're paying for the sins of our fathers, right? Third, fourth generation paying for the sins of our fathers. That's why we're afflicted. But why are the Gerim afflicted after all they're new people? They shall because they didn't do the Shev Mitzvah when they were Goyim, right? A Goy also has a mitzvah to keep Shev Mitzvah, and they didn't keep that, so they're being punished. Once he's Megayer, you can't punish him for what he did before because he's Megayer now. What he did before doesn't count. He's a new person. Gershon is Geyer, pardon? Oppressed in general. They're oppressed. They're Tsaras, and even oppressed by the Jews also. Oppressed by Jews also. They're oppressed by Jews. In other words, they're looked down upon, and sometimes bad things happen to them. Why are they oppressed and afflicted? The afflictions come to them. It's mashmin hashemayim. Oppressed could be even by people, by other Jews. Why? Because they didn't do the mitzvah at all. Rebbe says no, that wouldn't be a reason. Gershon Sky Kasham, they don't have to pay for what they did when they were non-Jews. After all, Gershon Sky Kasham, he's like a new person. As we said, that a ger meikar adin, if a ger is megayer and his sister's megayer, he can marry his sister meikar adin. The rabbi said don't, but it's not good. But basically, they'll come to other attention, forget about the physical aspects, but that you might come to do other things. But Menator, you could. It's a person. El Neiman. Why are they afflicted? Why are they oppressed? They don't do the mitzvahs properly. They're not Bekiyan. They accepted Gerim without being Mekayim the mitzvahs, without them understanding the mitzvahs. They didn't do the mitzvahs properly. Now, as they're full Jews, now they're being punished for not observing the mitzvahs properly. Because they're only afraid, because when they become gerim, a lot of them, they're only doing out of fear of God. They're afraid of hell. Piranhas are more, they're afraid of punishment, but they don't do it out of avas Hashem. That's how the gerim were in those days. He's talking about, when he says Bisman Hazeh, it means in the days of the time of the Gemara. Because they delayed becoming Jews. Now, some of Farshim say, well, this disagrees also with Gershon Skar Kat and Shanoladam, because you can't blame him for delaying, because then he was a goy. Others say that no, they should show us because Gerim were also, that brought down that Gerim were also at Har Sinai, and they were also obligated, but they didn't take action. They didn't take action yet, but their neshamas were also there, and because they delayed, they were also punished, even if you're Gershon Skar Kat Shanami, that they delayed becoming a Jew. Amar Vuvitim Rab Chanina, my car. Where do you see it's from the pasuk that it's an Indian, it's a special Indian for a ger, that he's rewarded for becoming a ger right away, that he's not without delay. See this by Rus, right? It says Yisham Hashem Palach. She's told Naomi told Rus, Yisham Hashem Palach, Hashem should pay you for what you've done. V'tim askot Hashem Amiyam Hashem, and your payment, your reward, your shall be full from God. Okay, Israel. Asher Basa Lachsos, that you came to take refuge under Tachas Kanafa. Hashem should pay you back, because yes, you were destined from Har Sinai to be Megayer, but the fact that you didn't delay and you want to do it as soon as possible, you'll be specially rewarded for that. All right, so that completes this discussion of the Gerim. Tomorrow we're going to talk more about, we'll get back into Inyan of Mamzeru. Have a good day, everybody. Kol Tuv, Shavuot Tov.